Hello and welcome back to Reading Past Midnight, or welcome for the first time if this is the first time you found yourself at my site. Please hit the like and subscribe button as it will help my channel grow. It is a young channel and I don't have a lot of subscribers yet. As of the recording of this, I had 81 this morning when I took a look at my statistics, and yeah, I've been doing a few more videos lately, and that number has tripled in the last 2 weeks, which is great. Thank you for watching. Today we're going to get into My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, but we're going to do it by way of the search for the greatest novel ever written. In this case, we're going to look for the greatest novel of the 21st century. Let's condense our problem down a little bit. The New York Times facilitated us in two ways. First, they put together their list of the 100 best books of the 21st century. Excuse me. This is compiled by authors and writers and professionals, which is different from the perspective of readers. And I'll get to that in a second. The other thing this list contains is nonfiction. And right now, I'm just interested in fiction. We're looking for the greatest novel, not the greatest book. I don't think that you can really fairly compare fiction and nonfiction. The purposes of the two are completely different. Because with fiction, no matter how you look at it, even with really meaningful fiction, part of the role of fiction is to entertain. And I know that people will argue that, well, I read nonfiction for entertainment. Yes and no. If you're reading nonfiction strictly for entertainment, you're missing the purpose of the nonfiction. Nonfiction is written, if it's really well written, it's written to grip you as a reader and to draw you in, but it's written to educate, to teach you something about a subject that you didn't know and that someone else is an expert in. And this list provides quite a hefty number of nonfiction, but because there's 100 titles here, there's quite a bit that we can make good use of. Now, the first book on the list, well, I should say maybe the 100th, depending on how you're reading it. The best book of the 21st century, according to this group of professionals, was My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. And I think that's a nom de plume. I don't think that's her real name. But this presents one problem. Well, actually, it presents four. We have 4 books, and the 4 books appear to be telling one story. I have only read the first one, My Brilliant Friend, and that's what I'll mainly be talking about today when I discuss the novel. Relatively short, 325 pages. Volume 2 has 475 pages. There's 700-800 pages. So now we're in the very long book category. Volume 3, a little over 400. 8, 4, 1,200. And another 475. So let's say 1,500 pages worth of book. Now, the New York Times did something which I kind of appreciate, in that they did publish the list compiled by readers. I don't know who their readers were, but it gives us a slightly different perspective, definitely a different order. I want to check something here. Okay, so we have two other titles by Elena Ferrante in this list. The Days of Abandonment, which is not in this collection, and The Story of the Lost Child, which is the fourth book. Now, The Story of the Lost Child comes in at number 80. I kind of have a disagreement with the way they handle this, because I don't think you can necessarily separate these. You clearly have volumes 1 through 4 of the same story. So one of the things that came out in the Norton list of the top 10 greatest novels ever written, the greatest novel ever written, according to that list, was Proust, Remembrance of Things Past, In Search of Lost Time, depending on which translation. If you're reading it in the French, you're doing a lot better than I can do. All right. This is the complete vintage translation from early in the 20th century, or earlier in the 20th century. It has recently been retranslated, possibly by 2 different publishers. Volume 1 contains 2 novels, Swan's Way and Within a Budding Grove. Volume 2 contains 2 novels, The Gramante's Way and Cities of the Plain. Volume 3 contains 3 novels, and it's actually shorter than those 2. I don't know, total pages. I'll take a look here. Total pages, 1,000 total pages in Volume 3. It's my understanding that he did not complete the edits and rewrites of the last 3, so I'm told they actually are much quicker to read than the first 4. Yeah, the Norton counts this as a 1, which in one way makes sense. It's one story. It is conceived of as a single piece. So, here we have 1,500 pages, published in 4 volumes. This is clearly conceived of in one piece. This is, I was looking at My Brilliant Friend, and they had it listed as a Bildungsroman, which alone it is not. A Bildungsroman is a story of one person's entire life. In this case, it follows 2 people. So if you're going to say it's a Bildungsroman of 2 people, it's got to follow their entire life, or encompassing something that brings the story or the life to an end. One of my favorite Bildungsromans is A Perfect Spy by John le Carré. The spy Pym, who commits suicide, I believe, and the novel tells the complete story of how he became a spy for the other side. And in so doing, it tells the story of his entire life. Great novel. But getting back to the Bildungsroman, you have 4 volumes to tell the whole story. So I think that you can take maybe 1 and 4 and say, these belong on the list of the top 100 books. These don't. Can you read volume 4 and make sense of it without volumes 2 and 3? I don't know. I've only made it through volume 1 so far. So what I say is going to be based on my reading of volume 1. The thing that prompted me to read this is the list. Right here, the New York Times list, when it popped up as number 1. So I said, okay, I've got to get into this. And it looked like a story that I was probably not going to like, which the opposite happened. I love this novel. This is a great novel. But one of the things that I do when I don't expect to like it, is listen to it. Now you're going to say, well, you're not a purist, so you didn't read the book, you listened to the book. And yeah, you can make that argument, but I don't think it's a valid one, because stories were told verbally long before writing existed. So the act of storytelling is a slightly different skill brought to you by a reader via whatever format you're using. So there is something to it. Also, I'm just going to throw in a little aside here on audio books. For years, I had wanted to read Wallace Stegner's Angle of Repose. And let's just leave aside the little controversy about Stegner and the novel. If you're interested in the controversy, Google the New Yorker article about it. It's an interesting story, and then you can wonder about why he did what he did when writing this novel. I had started to read Angle of Repose 4 times. The farthest I ever got into the book was about 100 pages before I put it down. I could not tell you why that was the case, but it just never grabbed me. It never gripped me. And finally, I reached a point where I was doing a lot of driving. And I decided, you know what? This is supposedly one of the greatest American novels. I need to be familiar with it. So I'm going to plow through and listen to it while I'm in the car. And something happened. I loved the book, which I didn't expect. I didn't expect to like it even, but I loved it. I thought it was a great book. And I know a lot of people that started reading it and just couldn't get through it. And I might recommend to them that they try an audio version of the book. With an audio version, you're experiencing it in a different way. And I will sometimes do that with a novel that I don't expect to like. Since then, because I've learned that I can like something audibly that I don't necessarily like reading. But in this case, I did it because I didn't know if I would like it. This book starts off with 2 girls that are in elementary school. Not exactly something a 64-year-old man would be interested in reading. And it ends when they're 16. You could legitimately call this a coming-of-age story, which it is, because you look at the picture and there's someone in a wedding dress and a suit, and 3 little girls behind. You see, this is clearly a picture of a wedding. And a wedding takes place at the end of the novel. I don't think I'm really giving anything away that the book cover didn't give away in the story. So you have the story of 2 girls and their life in Naples, and in a poor area of Naples, and the vicissitudes that they go through. Now, these are 2 girls that are above average intelligence, and my brilliant friend, from the title, you can guess that there is going to be one that is extremely bright, or at least that the narrator believes is extremely bright. And, you come to the question by the end of the novel, or close to the end of the novel, is the narrator talking about herself or about her friend? Now, the loves of teenage girls is not necessarily something that I am interested in reading about. The emotional lives of teenage girls is, when put together in this novel, interesting. It's a great story. It's well written. It's well told. And if you haven't picked it up and read it, go ahead and do it. You're in for a treat. But I suspect that a lot of people have. It's been on bestseller lists for forever. It's a TV series. The reason I wanted to grab it and talk about it is not so much to tell you to read the novel in and of itself, although I'm letting you know as a 64-year-old male reader that even though it may seem like something you're not going to be interested in, it's still a great book. You can probably enjoy it. But from the perspective of the greatest novel ever written, how do we approach this? And do we approach this as one book? In which case, this is a great book. It's not on the list. It's a coming-of-age story, well told. It's an author who is very good at explaining the emotional ups and downs of a teenage girl in a way that even I could understand. And having worked as a middle school teacher, I can tell you it's not easy to understand the emotional ups and downs of teenage anything. The emotions, if you look back at your life in those times, you probably remember, your emotions swinging all over the place. It's a natural part of being a teenager. You're going through these wild swings of emotions as these hormones hit your body. Although she doesn't discuss the hormones, it's quite clear that, as her perceptions of the boys around her, the friends around her, change as she gets older and understands some of the conflicts and friendships that are around her all the time in greater depth and meaning, we as readers are brought along for that journey and we understand too. Does this help you get into the mind of a teenager? A little bit. But on its own, this is not going to compete for the greatest novel ever written. It's, coming-of-age novels are a dime a dozen. Really great ones are, rare. This is a really great one. But I think that for the greatest novel ever written, it has to have more meaning. So the question comes, do we take the 4 books together and count them as a unity, as was done with Proust, in which case we're open up to a whole nother realm of novels. The 3rd book on the 100 Best, in the book review here, is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. That was a series, I think, of 3 books. It's on my to-read list. I haven't gotten there yet. But the books are here in the bookshelf, and I will probably be reading this soon. And as I go down this list, there are a number of really great books that I have read that are in this list. Number 6, 266 by Roberto Bolaño. Brilliant book. This is a book that deserves to be discussed in the context of the greatest book ever written. It contains 4 or 5 sections. And when he was towards the end of his life, he was finishing up the book, and he wanted to publish it as separate novels. To a certain extent, that book kind of works as separate pieces, but they're still all tied together, linked together, and they make one whole story. The reason he wanted to publish them separately is because he knew he was dying, and he knew that he would make more money if they were published separately. Money is important when looking at things like this. You can make more money selling 5 books if you're popular enough than selling 1. You'll get royalties from 5 different books. His family, however, overrode him and said this was conceived and written as 1 book. The world should see it in the way you meant for it to be seen. So we have the book 2666. And we need to conceive of it as a whole, which is the way the author conceived of it. Now, when you write a book that is this long, 4 volumes, you let it out piece by piece as far as income goes, and I have no problem with authors doing this because, most authors are not multi-millionaires, although some are. I have no problem with buying 4 books, giving royalty 4 times for a story that unfolds and that can be taken as 4 separate stories. I think the authors are entitled to a little extra. No problem with that. But how we look at it as in our quest for the greatest novel is necessarily a little different. I think we need to look at this as one novel, in which case I got a bunch of reading to do before I can really fully discuss this as a single novel. By way of comparison, I have The Count of Monte Cristo, greatest revenge story ever, and Henry Fielding's Tom Jones. And I pulled these out because they're both very long books, and we would be discussing these in the Very Long Book Project if I decide to discuss these. Tom Jones, which is a truly funny novel. I very rarely laugh out loud when reading a novel. Tom Jones, there were a number of places where I just burst out laughing. 875 pages. Definitely in the Very Long Book Project. But then we get to Alexandre Dumas, The Count of Monte Cristo. This is big. This is 1,400 pages. Now I realize you can do this in smaller type and make it shorter. Probably there are volumes that do that. This is the Modern Library Classics, which is going to be a good translation. It's not going to be necessarily the greatest translation at all, but I've read a lot of books in the Modern Library Classics series, and I've always enjoyed the books. I've found the translations to be of high quality. So you've got 1,500 pages here, almost 1,400 pages. This is put out as one book. However, it was not originally put out as one book. It was put out weekly. This was a story that was published in the newspapers, and it was put out as a lot of novels of that time period were, in the newspapers, and then you might buy it in parts. I don't know if this was published in parts, but there are collectors who have the different parts of like Dickens novels, and then they get a nice clamshell case to put the separate parts in, and never touch them again. Sometimes that can be in the collection. And then if they read it, they pick up something like this to read. This is the greatest revenge story ever told. This is perfectly plotted, well put together, well written. I suspect that when this started publication, the story was not done. A lot of times Dumas would be scribbling stuff out, and then he'd have assistants that would actually flesh out some of the writing, which is why there's uneven quality between some parts of some of the novels. And then it would be rushed to the newspapers. They'd get the next chapter into the next edition. Dickens was very often published. I think most of his stuff was published in the same way. So if you're reading a Dickens novel for the first time, you're getting it, like, for example, in the United States, and it's published 2 weeks ago in England. It can be a while before it makes it here. Everybody wants to hear the story of Oliver Twist. And they're waiting patiently for that next chapter. kind of like a weekly TV series now. And if you use that as comparison, you notice that there are various quality differences between the episodes of any TV series. I did want to bring in a third one, and this one I think deserves discussion as far as the greatest novel ever written. Maybe not, certainly one of the great American novels. Peter Matheson, Shadow Country. This is one story told from 3 different perspectives. It was originally released as 3 separate novels. Matheson then went back, rewrote the novels, cleaned them up, edited them, and put them together in one volume. I have not read the 3 separate novels. I'm going to stick with this one, simply because I don't have the time, at least not right now, to compare the 3 novels versus this one when this one is perfect for the story as being 3 volumes, 1 novel. 4 volumes here, 1 novel. So that's how I'm going to treat this going forward. Do I have anything else to say? Yes. Given the fact that they had the list by professionals, these are the people that write and distribute and critique books, versus the list put together by readers. There's a lot of books on the readers list that are not on the original New York Times list. Now you can Google these, just go to the New York Times 100 Greatest Books. It's not something that's behind a paywall, so you can look at this, you can print out, they give you a little thing, you can check mark which ones you've read, which ones you want to read. A lot of great books on here. The readers list has one book in particular that I'm going to talk about in my follow-up video, because I think that it belongs in the discussion. Cutting for Stone by Abraham Verghese. This is a brilliant novel, also for another episode. We'll be back to that shortly, because I'm probably going to record that one today and just edit it and post it down the road a little bit. All right, so that concludes my discussion today of My Brilliant Friend. Read it, drink some coffee while you're reading it, or drink whatever you like to drink while you're reading it. Please throw a comment in. I'm not getting too many comments. I'd like to know what your thoughts are. What do you consider the best novel that you have read so far in the 21st century, that was written in the 21st century? There are a lot of good ones. There really are a lot of good ones. So give me your thoughts. Let me know what you're talking about. Just put the title in a comment. You know, which one was your favorite in the 21st century? Somewhere down the road, we'll get into a discussion of favorite versus best. And in questioning people that I know in conversation about books, I have gotten responses that bring up that question. And just a shout out here to Leaf by Leaf. He just did a long review about Suttree by Cormac McCarthy, where he said that Blood Meridian is his most important book, but Suttree is his best book. So you might want to think about that too when you're thinking about authors, especially authors that get into more complicated novels that have more philosophical implications versus novels that are just telling stories. And then where do they belong in the question of the greatest novel ever written? I hope you'll continue with us, with me, on the journey as we are on the quest for the greatest novel ever written. Please let me have your thoughts down below. If you've made it this far, hit the like and subscribe, the little notification bell, because if you made it this far, I think that you probably like maybe listening to the discussion and add your voice. Thank you very much. Again, Ron Rutstein, your host, Reading Past Midnight. Stay up and read with a dim light so you don't wake up your spouse.